When a 78-year-old grandmother said those words on stage, Steve Harvey did something he'd never done in 15 years of hosting Family Feud. He stopped the show mid-game, put down his cue cards, and walked straight to her. Cameras captured the tears streaming down his face as the entire studio fell silent. What she said next would change not just that day's taping, but the way Steve Harvey saw his own purpose. The lights of Studio 33 at CBS Television City blazed as they always did. Another episode of Family Feud, another crowd ready for laughs, another two families competing for prize money. But this Tuesday afternoon would be different. This was the day Steve Harvey learned that some moments are too sacred for scripts. The Johnson family stood on the left podium, 5 members strong, all wearing matching burgundy shirts. They'd driven 16 hours from a small town in Mississippi, pooling gas money and vacation days for this chance. On the right, the Martinez family in navy blue, a multi-generational crew from Texas, 3 generations united for their shot at game show glory. But it was the woman in the audience, seat D14, row 7, who would make this episode unforgettable. Dorothy Mae Williams, 78 years old, silver hair pinned back in the way women of her generation wore it, a floral dress she'd pressed that morning with care, pearl earrings that had been her mother's. She wasn't there to play. She'd come to watch her granddaughter compete. Steve Harvey bounded onto the stage with his signature energy, that perfectly tailored light gray 3-piece suit catching the studio lights. "Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Family Feud." The audience erupted. Steve fed off that energy. This was his element. The jokes flowed, the banter sparkled, the game began. But what happened in the next 8 minutes would strip away every bit of performance and reveal something raw, something real, something that reminded everyone in that studio why certain people are chosen to stand in front of cameras and hold space for the human experience. Round 1 played out normally. The Johnson family took an early lead. Steve worked the room like the master he is, quick wit, perfect timing, that ability to find humor in the space between the question and the answer. The audience loved it. This was Family Feud at its finest. Then came round 3. The category appeared on the board. "Name something you pray for every single day." Steve read the question with his usual flair, but there was something different in the room now. A shift in the energy that the cameras couldn't quite catch but the live audience felt. The first contestant, a young woman from the Johnson family, rang in. "My family's health." The board lit up, number 1 answer, 38 points. Applause, celebration, Steve with his signature reaction. But then the camera operator, following Steve's gaze, noticed something. Steve had stopped mid-sentence. His attention had drifted to section D, row 7. Dorothy Mae Williams had risen from her seat. Not dramatically. Not seeking attention. She'd simply stood up, hands clasped together, lips moving in what was unmistakably prayer. The game continued for another 30 seconds, but Steve Harvey wasn't hosting anymore. He was watching. Watching this elderly woman, eyes closed, swaying slightly, completely unaware that the entire production had shifted around her singular moment of faith. Then Steve did something that made the director's hand freeze over the commercial break button. He held up his palm. The universal signal, stop. He walked away from his mark, away from the podiums, toward the audience. "Hold on," Steve said quietly. The studio went silent. "Just hold on." He stepped off the stage. Production assistants exchanged confused glances. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how Family Feud worked. But Steve Harvey wasn't thinking about format, or airtime, or commercial breaks. He walked up the audience steps to row 7, seat D14. Dorothy Mae Williams opened her eyes to find Steve Harvey standing right in front of her. "Ma'am," Steve said, his voice catching slightly, "I need to know. What are you praying for? Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." The microphone boom operator scrambled to position for audio. The entire studio held its breath. Dorothy Mae looked at Steve Harvey, at this man she'd watched on television for years, and something in her eyes said she'd been waiting for this question her whole life. "I'm praying for my granddaughter," she said, her voice soft but steady. "That's her right there." She pointed to Sarah Johnson, the young woman who just answered on the stage, the one wearing the burgundy shirt. "But I'm not praying that she wins this game. I'm praying that she remembers who she is when she leaves here." Steve's expression shifted. The comedian's mask slipped away entirely. Dorothy Mae continued. "You see, Mr. Harvey, my Sarah lost her mother last year. My daughter. Cancer took her in 6 months. Sarah's been raising her little brother by herself. She's 24 years old, working 2 jobs, going to nursing school at night. She came on this show because she thought the money might help. But what I'm praying for, what I pray for every single morning, is that she remembers she's already won. That she's already enough. That her mama's looking down so proud." The tears on Steve Harvey's face weren't camera ready. They weren't part of a bit. They were real, streaming down into his mustache, and he made no attempt to hide them. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled. Should they cut? Should they go to commercial? But the director, a 30-year veteran of television, made a call that would define his career. "Keep rolling," he said. "Whatever this is, we're staying with it." Steve Harvey took both of Dorothy Mae's hands in his. "How long have you been praying that prayer?" "Every day for 387 days, she said without hesitation. "Since the day my daughter passed. I count every morning." Something broke in Steve in that moment. Or maybe something finally came together. He turned to face the cameras, still holding Dorothy Mae's hands, his face completely open, no performance, no pretense. "You know what?" Steve said, addressing the studio, the families, the crew, everyone. "We're gonna take a moment here. Because this is what faith looks like. This right here. Not winning money. Not getting your name on TV. This is faith. A grandmother who's been counting days and praying that her granddaughter knows she's enough." The audience rose to their feet. Not because applause lights told them to. Not because it was expected. They stood because they just witnessed something that transcended entertainment. Steve walked Dorothy Mae down to the stage. Sarah Johnson, tears streaming down her own face, met her grandmother halfway. The two families, Johnson and Martinez, competitors just moments ago, spontaneously joined hands on stage. Steve stood in the middle, looking at the cameras with an expression that said, "This is why we're really here." "You want to know what I pray for every single day?" Steve said. "I pray that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. And today, right now, I know that prayer got answered." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took a small card. On one side was his name and contact information. On the other, he'd written something years ago that had become his personal motto. "Faith moves mountains. Love moves hearts. Purpose moves both." He handed it to Dorothy Mae. "You keep this," he said. "And when you count day 388 tomorrow morning, you remember that your prayer got heard by more than just the ceiling of your house. It got heard in this studio, by these cameras, by everyone who's going to see this. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Steve turned to the production team. "Stop the game," he said. "Both families win. Split the prize money. I'll cover the difference myself." The director's jaw dropped. Steve Harvey had just rewritten the rules of Family Feud, and everyone knew no executive would dare override this decision. Not after what they just captured. The Johnson family and the Martinez family erupted in tears and embraces. Sarah Johnson held her grandmother, as if she might disappear. The audience wept openly. Production assistants wiped their eyes. A show that had started as entertainment had become something else entirely. A moment of grace, witnessed and shared. After the cameras stopped rolling and the audience filed out, Steve Harvey sat on the edge of the stage, his expensive suit forgotten, still processing what had happened. Dorothy Mae sat beside him. They didn't speak for several minutes. Finally Steve asked, "How did you know to stand up right then? Did you plan that?" Dorothy Mae smiled. "Mr. Harvey, I didn't plan anything. I just felt the spirit move, And I've learned at my age that when you feel that, you don't question it. You just stand up. Steve nodded slowly. You changed something in me today, he said. I don't know exactly what yet, but something shifted. That's what faith does, Dorothy Mae replied. It shifts things. Sometimes mountains, sometimes hearts. Always when we need it most. Steve took off his suit jacket, the one he'd worn so carefully that day, and draped it over Dorothy Mae's shoulders. You keep this too, he said, as a reminder that your prayers don't just go up. Sometimes they come down and change the person standing right in front of you. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The episode aired 3 weeks later. CBS received over 40,000 emails in the first 48 hours. Not about the game. Not about the comedy. About faith. About grandmothers. About the moment Steve Harvey chose humanity over entertainment, and reminded everyone watching that some things matter more than winning. Steve Harvey kept a photo from that day in his dressing room for the rest of his time hosting Family Feud. Dorothy Mae Williams in his suit jacket, Sarah Johnson with her arm around her grandmother, both families joined together on stage. Beneath it he'd written, Day 387. The day I learned what I'm really here for. Dorothy Mae passed away 2 years later at 80, surrounded by family. At her funeral, Sarah wore that suit jacket. In the pocket, still there, was Steve's card. Faith moves mountains. Love moves hearts. Purpose moves both. Steve Harvey flew to Mississippi for the service. He didn't make a speech. He just sat in the back, a man who'd learned from a grandmother in a floral dress that the real show isn't the one with cameras and cue cards. The real show is what happens when we stop performing and start being present. In the months following that episode, something remarkable happened across America. Grandmothers started writing to Steve Harvey. Thousands of letters arrived at CBS, all sharing the same theme. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for stopping the show. Thank you for reminding the world that our prayers matter. One letter particularly moved Steve. It came from a woman in Oregon whose own grandmother had passed the week after the episode aired. She made me watch it with her 3 times. The letter read, Each time, she paused it at the moment you walked up those stairs. That's what respect looks like, she told me. That man stopped his whole show to honor faith. She passed away holding my hand, and her last words were, Count your days. Make them mean something. Thank you for giving my grandmother that moment. Steve framed that letter. It hangs in his home office, next to the photo from row 7, seat D14. On days when the spotlight feels heavy, when the performance demands too much, he reads it. A reminder that the best moments in life aren't scripted. They're surrendered to. The Martinez family, who'd been on stage that day, later revealed something that didn't make the broadcast. After the cameras stopped, they'd gathered around Dorothy Mae and asked if they could pray with her. All 10 people, 2 families who'd been strangers an hour before, joined hands in that studio and prayed together. We weren't competing anymore, Maria Martinez said in an interview. We were just humans, reminded of what matters. That's the real prize we took home. Sarah Johnson finished nursing school. She now works in pediatric oncology, the same ward where her mother spent her final days. She credits that Family Feud appearance, that moment when her grandmother stood up and Steve Harvey walked up those stairs, with giving her the strength to keep going. I was drowning, she admitted in a local news interview. I was going to quit school, quit everything. But when Steve honored my grandmother's faith on national television, something in me shifted. I realized my mom's legacy wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I chose to do with the love she gave me. She still wears Steve's suit jacket on the hardest days at the hospital. Her colleagues know what it means. When they see Sarah in that oversized gray jacket, they know she needs a moment, a reminder that she's already won, that she's already enough. Family Feud continued, seasons rolled on, but something had changed. Steve approached every episode differently after that day. He looked at the audience differently. He listened differently. Because Dorothy Mae Williams had taught him that you never know when someone in row 7, seat D14, might stand up and remind you what faith actually looks like. The game show would end eventually, as all shows do. But that moment, that prayer, that choice to stop the cameras and honor something sacred, that became part of Steve Harvey's legacy. Not the comedy. Not the ratings. But the Tuesday afternoon he learned that some moments are too important for scripts, and the most powerful thing you can do with a platform is recognize when to set it aside and simply be human. 387 days of prayer. One moment of recognition. A lifetime of impact. That's what happens when faith meets purpose on a game show stage. That's what happens when a grandmother stands up. That's what happens when Steve Harvey chooses to see what matters most.